They gave us the 31st floor. I noticed that right away, not the lobby, not the satellite conference suite where they usually parked vendors, but the executive level. The one with the floor-to-ceiling glass and the city spread out beyond it, like something you were supposed to be impressed by. The receptionist had been pleasant, almost careful, and she'd brought Cora a cup of hot chocolate without being asked, which told me that someone upstairs knew exactly who was coming and had prepared accordingly. Someone, anyway. Cora sat in the chair nearest the window and opened her book, the one about the polar expedition she'd been working through for 2 weeks. She'd brought a granola bar and a small thermos of tea, because Cora at 11 was the most self-sufficient person I'd ever known, and she'd learned that waiting in rooms was easier with provisions. I set my bag on the table and pulled out my laptop. We had 12 minutes before they came in. I used 9 of them reviewing the renewal clause one more time. Not because I'd forgotten it, but because I like to know exactly what I'm holding before I sit down across from people who think they already know what they're dealing with. The original agreement was 41 pages. The part that mattered most was 4 lines in Section 4C, which stipulated that any renegotiation of the base licensing rate required mutual written consent from both parties. Both parties. That word had been doing a lot of work for 6 months. They came in at 2 on the dot, 4 of them. The CEO, Diane Calloway, I recognized from the firm's website, mid-50s, gray at the temples, the kind of compose that takes years to build. She gave me a real handshake and said she appreciated me making the time. Behind her came 2 men I placed as legal, early 40s, both in the same shade of charcoal, one with a yellow legal pad. And then, last, Petra Holt. I'd heard the name. Senior VP of Procurement, the one who'd pushed to renegotiate the renewal term 6 months ago, the one whose team had sent over a revised schedule that cut the per seat licensing by 31% and added a 6-month termination window. I hadn't signed it. I hadn't called either. I just waited. In my experience, organizations that send revised terms without a conversation are not confused about what they're doing. They're betting on impatience or uncertainty on the other side. The right response is usually to demonstrate that you have neither. Petra Holt sat down across from me without making eye contact, opened a leather portfolio, and began speaking before Diane had fully settled into her chair. I want to be upfront about where we are, she said. We've had our team review the original agreement. There's latitude in the interpretation of Section 4C that we believe supports the revised schedule. We'd like to resolve this today. She said it the way people say things when they've decided the other party doesn't have a real choice. Smoothly, without looking up, the kind of tone that assumed I was already nodding. I said, I read your revision. We have some distance to cover. That was when she looked up. Her eyes went past me to Cora in the corner with her book. Something shifted in her face, not curiosity, not warmth, the other kind. Is that your daughter? She said. It is, I said. This isn't a daycare, Petra Holt said. And I don't negotiate with men who bring their baggage to the table. The room went quiet in a particular way, not the quiet of a pause, but the quiet of people who heard something and are waiting to see what happens next. I heard Diane Calloway pull a slow breath. I heard one of the legal men set his pen down. I looked at Cora. She hadn't looked up from her book, but the set of her shoulders had changed by a fraction. The particular stillness of a child who has heard something and has decided not to show it. She was 11. She'd learned that particular skill earlier than she should have had to. I closed my laptop. I've thought about that moment many times since, and I still can't tell you that I made a decision. It wasn't a decision. It was just the only thing there was to do. I'd spent 19 years in workplace safety, 19 years watching what contempt costs organizations, what it costs the people inside them, the slow bleed of it. I'd built an entire methodology around the idea that the way you treat the people in your building tells you everything about the health of the structure itself. And someone had just, in 30 seconds, given me a very clear picture of the health of this particular structure. I put my laptop in my bag. I stood up. We're done here, I said it quietly. Not angry, I want to be clear about that. Not performing anything. Just a statement of fact, the way you'd say the meeting is at 2 or the clause reads as follows. I picked up my bag, I walked to the corner, and I put my hand on Cora's shoulder. Ready? I said. She looked up. She closed her book. She stood up. We were almost to the door when Diane Calloway said, Mr. Calendar. Her voice was different than it had been when we came in, still composed, but careful now, the way someone sounds when they're doing math quickly in their head. I stopped. I didn't turn around right away. Could I have 5 minutes? She said, in the hall. I looked at Cora. Wait here for me, I said, and I nodded at the chair she'd just vacated, and she sat back down without a word and opened her book again. In the hall, Diane Calloway closed the glass door behind her and stood with her back to it, and for a moment she didn't say anything. The city was visible through the corridor windows. Gray sky, the kind of flat Tuesday afternoon light that doesn't flatter anyone. Through the glass, I could see Cora in her corner chair, book open again, as composed as she'd been at the start. The granola bar was on the armrest. She was fine. I want to apologize for what was said in there, Diane told me. Thank you, I said. That was not something I authorized or anticipated. I believe you, I said. She looked at me steadily. I also want to be direct with you about where the company stands. You know what Section 4C means for our platform. We have an audit window that opens in 11 weeks. Without the renewal, our federal compliance certification lapses, and we're looking at a notification requirement to every client on the enterprise tier. I nodded. I did know that. I'd known it when I read their revised schedule 6 months ago, and I'd known it when I didn't sign it. So I need you to come back in the room, she said, and I need Petra to understand what she did. I'm not asking for theater, I told her. Neither am I, Diane said. We went back in. Petra Holt was still in her chair. She had her pen in her hand, and something about her posture suggested she expected this to go a certain way, that I'd return, that Diane would smooth it over with a word or two, that we'd get back to the schedule and put the unpleasantness in a drawer. I recognized that posture. I'd seen it in a lot of rooms. Diane stood at the head of the table. She didn't sit. Petra, she said, I need you to step out. The pen stopped. I'm the lead on this negotiation. I understand that, Diane said. Please step out. The quiet in the room had a different weight this time. One of the legal men looked at his notepad. The other looked at the window. Petra Holt set her pen down with a small, precise click, gathered her portfolio, and left. I sat back down. Cora came and sat in her corner chair again with her book, and nobody in that room said a word about it. For the next 40 minutes, we talked about the actual agreement, not the revised schedule, the original agreement, the IP licensing methodology that my firm had developed between 2004 and 2009, the 1,500-hour documentation process, the federal standard mapping that Verano's platform had been built on top of, the audit trail that tied every module of their current compliance system back to my firm's original framework. The two legal men had clearly read it recently. One of them had flagged 3 pages and had specific questions, which I appreciated. When someone has actually read the document, the conversation moves faster. We went through each flag methodically, and by the third one, I could tell that both of them understood where this was going. The original rate stood. I knew it would. The math doesn't work any other ways when the certification window is 11 weeks out, and we all understood that. But I had one condition I hadn't put in writing anywhere. I laid it out at the end. I want a clause in the renewal, I said. That requires written notice, not less than 90 days, before any attempt to renegotiate the core licensing rate. And I want the notice to come to me directly, not to a revised schedule landing in my inbox. Diane looked at me. You want to be in the room. I want to be treated like the person I am, I said, which, in this agreement, is the originating IP holder, not a vendor. There was a pause. One of the legal men wrote something. Then Diane said, that's reasonable. We shook hands at 4:15. The two legal men stayed to work up the addendum. I put my laptop in my bag, and Cora put her book in her backpack, and Diane Calloway walked us to the elevator herself. She's been here since the beginning, Diane said, nodding toward Cora. School let out early, I said. She doesn't mind boardrooms. Diane looked at her. What are you reading? Cora held up the book. It was about the Shackleton expedition, the one where every man lived because the leader refused to leave a single one of them behind. Diane smiled at that, a real one, the first unguarded expression I'd seen from her all afternoon. Good book, she said. It's the best one, Cora said. The elevator came. Diane shook my hand again, and then after a small pause, she crouched slightly and shook Cora's hand too, which I thought said something about her that the afternoon had been obscuring. The doors closed. We dropped 31 floors in silence. Cora had her backpack on both shoulders and her book under one arm, and at the 20th floor she looked up at me. You were very calm, she said. I tried to be, I said. Were you? I thought about that. The moment after Petra Holt had said what she'd said, the moment I'd looked at Cora's shoulders and understood what she'd chosen to do with her face. Hold it steady, give nothing away. 11 years old, and she already knew how to do that. Some part of me was proud of her for it, and some part of me was sorry she'd had to learn it. Mostly, I said. She nodded like that was a satisfactory answer and opened her book again before we reached the lobby. Outside, the gray afternoon had held. We walked 2 blocks to where I'd parked, the city moving around us the way it does on a Tuesday. People heading somewhere, not noticing us, not knowing anything about the 31st floor, or the 11-week window, or the clause that was being drafted right now with my name on it. I thought about Petra Holt. I wasn't angry at her. Not anymore. Not really. I'd been angry for about 4 seconds in that room, and then it had passed the way things pass when you understand them. She'd made an assumption. The assumption was wrong. That story was over. What she thought she saw when she looked across that table, a freelancer, a man with a canvas bag and a borrowed seat, wasn't the whole picture. It was rarely the whole picture. That's the thing about 19 years in this work. You stop expecting people to read the room correctly, and you start building your position so that it doesn't require them to. I thought about Diane Calloway crouching slightly to shake my daughter's hand. I thought about the two legal men who had actually read the document. I thought about the receptionist and the hot chocolate, unprompted. 19 years I'd been doing this work, building the methodology, writing the standards, then quietly licensing them to the companies that needed them without making a production of it. That was the job. You do the work, you make it reliable, you make sure the standard holds, and then you let the work speak. It had spoken today, I thought, in its own quiet way. Cora looked up from her book at the car door. Can we get dinner somewhere that has good soup? She said. We can, I said. She got in, and I put my bag in the trunk, and I stood there for a moment in the gray Tuesday air, with the city going about its business around me. 31 floors up, someone was adding a clause to a contract with my name on it. Down here, my daughter was reading about a man who brought everyone home. I got in the car. We went to find the soup.